VidDevoChurch. In this case, Utah Today. We like to take some time in the morning to listen to what people are saying, to think about what people are doing, and maybe consider what might be their way or a better way of doing what it is we're doing. We spoke of in Songs in the Night last night about how God can use many different venues or avenues to direct us in learning about what He's doing in creation. Being that He's the creator of all, God has given to every man a measure of faith. That means that everyone has a certain amount of faith, a certain capability of rational thought, the possibility of being able to learn more than what they've known before and cross over, as it were, from the physical realm into the things of the Spirit that Jesus was describing for us when He came from heaven to earth. Jesus often talked about His Father. He didn't say, well, this is God. He just simply said, my Father, a lot, because He had such a personal intimacy with God that He related to God as His Father. And I like that because that gives us a hope and an assurance that we too can likewise learn from our Father which is in heaven. You know, you've heard that prayer, Our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Well, you know, whenever I hear something that spiritual, I don't think much about it because it's so, I don't know, religious. Are you like that? Do you talk so religiously that you intimidate people? Now, don't get me wrong. If you're talking about God, you're going to intimidate people anyways. People will either like or intensely dislike what you have to say about God. There's usually no neutral ground. Now, sometimes you will find in other countries or other places people that do like to talk about lots of varieties of subjects so they can talk about God. But then you mention Jesus and suddenly, whoa, you'll see things get very quickly a little heated, a little animated. Utah Today, we want to be open to learning, but also discerning. Learning is the process of taking facts and information and determining what's accurate and what's possibly a learning curve that somebody maybe doesn't know what they're talking about or hasn't learned according to that measure of faith we just described. And their life experiences are limited in that area that they may be addressing. One of the scriptures we're told about living a Christian life, and one that applies directly to Utah Today, is that as much as is possible, be at peace with all men. That doesn't mean that you compromise in any way. It doesn't mean that you have to change your lifestyle per se. I mean, obviously if you're pounding on the floor or you're stomping in the kitchen, you know, in the middle of the night, that's not really conducive to people getting along. Or if you're screaming from the top of your lungs, or if you're running around, you know, yelling that Jesus is coming, you know, those things are kind of obnoxious. But you can still believe that Jesus is coming and still do things that may be boisterous, but you have to use your wisdom to know the time and the place for everything. You see, the point being, God has said in His Word that He causes the sun to rise on the wicked and the good. So God sees all of us as being open to responding to Him. I like to think of it this way, that wherever, however someone has learned something, I like to learn from their experience and their wisdom. I may not agree with their conclusions because that's depending upon what God has spoken to me about, and I listen to what people say, and I hear a lot. Doesn't mean that I always agree with any of it, but, I hear a lot. And sometimes I have to filter, some of it because it comes from television, or it might come from blogs, or from Facebook, or from something like an Onion site. I don't know if you know what Onion News is, but the Onion site is a parody. It's a making fun of the news. So they create these phony stories to make fun of the news, but it also makes fun of people that fall for these phony stories. It'll say something like, I'm trying to think of one. Let's think of one for Utah. Let's say Governor Herbert passes a bill that gives $5 to every citizen in Utah. Well, everybody would pay attention to that headline. Now, it would be false because obviously he didn't pass a bill like that. But they would say that to get your attention. And then they'd write up some story that sounds, really, the longer you read it, the more you realize it's not, you're going to kind of question whether or not it's true or not. It's going to be a joke. It's meant to be comedy or a parody. And that's what parodies do. They make fun of, like Saturday Night Live will make fun of certain characteristics. And it's meant to be done in a positive way. Now, sadly today, when we look at the internet, we find people believing in some of these things that are parodies or that aren't true. And that's where we have to be careful about what we're learning. I can learn from anybody, anywhere, anyplace, anytime, as God gives me ears to hear what His Spirit is teaching me that I can apply to my life. For instance, like if I want to learn something from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and I mention that a lot only because I live in Utah, so we mention that a lot. Or if I want to learn from the Catholic Church, or the Protestant, or the Calvary Chapel, or the evangelicals, or, dare I say, Tea Parties, or Democrats, or Republicans. I mean, I don't learn a lot from politics. I only recognize some of the techniques they're using to influence people. But God would have us to learn from a variety of sources. Someone may have a piece of the puzzle. Someone may have ability to make the pie. In Utah today, we want to be able to be open to discuss those things we can learn from other venues we might not normally think of, besides, oh, well, I'm a Bible-only person. God will teach me by His Word. Well, yeah, but you're still going to live and react and interact with other people, not only of other faiths or religions or practices or lifestyles, but you're going to learn from them. I mean, no offense, but God can use, a donkey. I mean, put it bluntly, the way He calls it is a jackass. He can use a donkey to speak to one of His prophets who was getting ready to do something wrong. And if He could so use a donkey, then I'm sure He could use anyone, anywhere, if we're willing to learn from what God might have for us today, especially today in Utah. Follow your guide. We were talking yesterday about following our guide, and it's kind of fun because whenever I start, sharing whatever God is doing, God seems to increase it and validate it. It's not because I'm wise or I'm particularly, anointed or appointed or chosen or sent or whatever you want to call it. But I think it's because I'm open. I'm willing to stop, look at what I'm doing, say, well, that's not working. Kind of like one of these plants that I planted. That's not working. It died. It died. So I looked at it and said, yeah, that's dead. I guess I'm not going to grow that one. Or, if it gets frostbit from putting it out in the cold in the morning, I guess I won't do that. But we learn if we choose to learn. If you want to be stuck in your ways, then yeah, you could separate yourself, as some people want to do, or become so religiously. A.W. Tozer called it being and Spurgeon used this word called a religious prig. Now, I'm not familiar with the word prig, but I think it means stuffed shirt. Somebody that's real stuffy and wants to stay away from anyone else. Well, I'm not like that. I like to listen. I like to, kind of pay attention. Most of the time, I'll admit, most people don't have much to say. They want to gossip or they want to backbite or talk down about something. But Sometimes you get a jewel or a gem of something that they've learned that acts as a means of teaching you something. Like, for instance, people going on trails. I like asking them, what's the trail like ahead? And that's what God wants to do with us today, in Utah today. Follow your guide. I am with you to guide you and to help you. Unseen forces are controlling your destiny. Your petty fears are groundless. What of a man walking through a glorious glade who fretted because ahead there lay a river, and he might not be able to cross it, when all the time the river was spanned by a bridge? O foolish man, little did you know, but once you did, why did you fret so? And what if a man, that same man, had a friend who knew the way, had planned it out, and assured him that at no part of the journey would any unforeseen contingency arrive, and that all was well? So leave your foolish fears and follow me, thus saith the Lord Jesus, your guide, the Holy Spirit of God, and determinedly refuse to consider the problems of tomorrow. My message to you today is to trust and to wait. You know, I like that. If we think we have to hurry up and do something, there's an old teaching, okay, maybe it's not that old, I don't know how old it is, really, now that I think about it, but we used to call it the tyranny of the urgent. If it needs to be done in a hurry, don't do it. Because if you haven't had a chance to pray about it, don't do about it. Don't go about doing what you think of, what you haven't thought about, without considering to talk about it with God. If I get in my car, and I think it's I-215, but I don't know, it might be some other freeway, but if I get in my car and start driving, I'm going to run into this massive backup of traffic if I haven't checked the freeway. But if I check the freeway, sometimes that can circumvent or warn me that there's something that's happened that can allow me to still get to my destination without having to be stuck in traffic or sitting still and waiting and listening to God tell me, well, you should have listened to me, or you should have waited. That's part of what I like about Utah. It doesn't have the same pace, the same rat race that Southern California did. Believe me, in California, you go, go, go. I mean, Sacramento was maybe less so, but it was still high volume, high energy, continually go, go, go. My wife worked for a company in California that she worked for the same company in Nevada and then worked for the same company in California. She wound up being let go as her position was terminated because of her retirement bonuses, and they were canceling all kinds of people that had been around for a few years. And most of them they fired. They figured out some way to get rid of them, and they cut their overhead. But she was so good at her job that every time they kept piling on more work, rather than quit like most people do, she kept trying to do it. I remember her coming home frustrated, burned out, and I kept telling her, honey, you just got to wait on the Lord. You know, I mean, I get it. I know what you're saying. I'm just telling you, you're bringing the job home and it's affecting us. You know, I said, we'll pray, but I'm just telling you, they're doing this on purpose. They're trying to make you quit. They're giving you way too much work for any one person to handle, and you're doing 5 jobs. And the more people they let go, the more work, yes, you're going to have to realize you can't get it done and just do the best you can. But she would get it done, and it would just burn her out, and she'd work longer and longer and harder and harder. And finally, they brought her in one day, and she thought she was getting her she thought she was getting her 5-year evaluation. She got her, 5-year plaque, whatever. But she thought she was getting her evaluation, and instead they were letting her go with a severance package. They didn't say flat out, well, we tried to get you to quit, but with some of the other employees that they had let go that there was no reason to, it was obvious they were cutting their overhead because of what we saw in the economy. The bennies outweighed the benefits of the company keeping people. So they did what most corporations do. They cut out all their well-paid, higher-wage people and started hiring new people at lower wages to do less work and to accomplish less. And that's what they were doing, and they saved money that way. And it's, it's a business is business. But what's interesting is that being in that field, she came to work here in Utah and works for a company that's family-owned and operated. And they treat each other somewhat like family, because not all families get along. They kind of, it's funny to hear some of the stories about them, talking or communicating in family ways, yelling. But they are growing. They are very caring. They are sensitive to their employees, and they care about how their employees are doing. And it's such a difference for my wife that she's blossoming under that environment. She had worked like that in Alaska, where people cared about their employees. You better, because they're going to be there the winter with you. But in winters, you have to get along. Trust me, you do, or you won't, and you won't be there long. But here in Utah, you don't have to get along with everyone, but it is easier in this state if you learn how to get along with each one and benefit from each person's experience. Someone asked me one time, they said, well, as a born-again Christian, what do you think about somebody that's gay? I said, well, I don't go to bed with them, so I don't think much about it one way or the other. I said, I can teach them, I can share with them the gospel, I can tell, just like any other human being, what sin is and what sin isn't. But to me, the difference between a person who is a homosexual or a person that's heterosexual is none whatsoever. The fact that they have chosen to use a lifestyle in their choices is between them and God. What they do with that and how they react to God talking to them is their personal faith. And if they choose to walk with Jesus, I'm sure he's going to talk to them about it. But until they're ready to have that conversation, I don't think they're going to make that choice. I think they're going to, even as we have this blue jay now sitting on my deck, he's watching me and checking out the flowers. But just like, God bringing to them the Word of God, when it's time, that person will deal with their lifestyle choices, just like anyone else in this state. People come up to me and say, well, hey, why do you hate, because I've talked to people on the internet, on the news sites, and they'll say, well, why do you hate Mormons? I said, I don't. What do you mean you don't hate Mormons? I said, well, I don't. I said, I don't care if you go to church at the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints any more than I care if you go to a monk's church or you go to Calvary Chapel. What you do as a church is to learn things. Now, to me, a church is just a school of education that you're learning some spiritual truths and some facts. You still have to decide what you do with those. Now, if you have learned from that church and that big denomination or that big, religious institution, and you like it, then do it. But, if you learn from it and you see that there are things you don't like, then don't go there. Don't do it. You're not stuck where you're at, but you should be constantly learning and then applying that knowledge. For me, as a Jesus freak, at one point in time, I was very much into Calvary chapels because they were very easy to go to and you would learn the Bible from. I know recently somebody told me that they love the Calvary Chapel movement because, you can go there and there's no, confrontation. I said, well, it depends on which one you go to, because the truth is there's a wide variety of the ways Calvary Chapel interprets each and every one of them differently what they think a Calvary Chapel is. And there are some out there that are really, whoa, you'd be surprised that they are allowed to be called a Calvary Chapel. The same thing I find true about anyone in any major organization, even the Mormons. My wife told me there were things like Jack Mormons and this Mormon and that Mormon and whatever Mormon. Well, I found out by my own learning and listening and talking to people that there are closet Mormons, people that have stayed in the church that don't agree with it. They're just staying in it because they like the programs or they like whatever it is they're doing. And so for business or for family or for whatever reason they've decided, they don't agree with it, but they stay in it and do it because of whatever reason they have. And I call them closet Mormons. So, everybody learns from whatever their life experiences has brought them. When I used to bartend, people would say, well, how could you bartend? I said, I was learning. God sent me into that job environment so that I could learn what Christian bartenders were like. Because there was a Christian Bartenders Association that I found on the internet and I wanted to learn about them. So when I was bartending in Alaska, I was a dry bartender, but I would still, just like anyone else, when I was behind the bar, I would listen to the person, talk to them, pay attention to their problems, give them some advice, even at times tell them about Jesus. I mean, that doesn't stop me, my job, from doing what God has sent me to do. Now, that's what we should be doing every day in our life. Whatever it is you've learned, apply it to your life and then ask God how to use it in your life. That's what we want to do in Utah today, Utah today, is we want to always look at what can we use and apply to our life today. Like it said in the message, follow your guide. If you have something that, is right in front of you that's telling you don't do it, then don't do it. Follow your gut instincts. If you look out at the sky and it looks warm, but you know in the morning it's going to be 30 degrees, don't always go by what you see. Go by what you've learned. I'm not going hiking in the Wasatch Mountain Range, with shorts on, because I know as soon as the wind comes up, it's going to be freezing, even though right now it feels like spring. So you have to use some learning process to apply the things that you're discovering about facts. Wisdom, we're told, you can learn from God if you want to. James 1:5 says, if any man lack wisdom, let him ask of God, who upbraideth not, but giveth to all men liberally. So it's up to you, really, to do what you want to do with or without God. But what my hope for you in Utah today is to simply say, use what you learned from, and then eventually you might come to the conclusion about God and his relationship he wants to have with you. You might not. And I'll say, God bless you. Go your way, whatever you want to do today. But you choose which way you will go and then enjoy it. Don't destroy your own life over something that's foolish or stupid or ignorant, but rather learn along the way. Because one thing I've noticed about young people and old people are more forgiving sometimes. Some people get set in their ways, but once you've lived long enough and you've had a variety of experiences, you learn how to have what the spiritual term is called grace, but you learn how to be more yielding and allowing other people to be who they are. So it's not a question of what some Christians will, when they're trying to play righteous games. It's not a question of what do they call it? Not uniformism, but collectivism, where they collect all the religions of the world and say everybody's good. No, I say everybody's bad and we're all working on it. Like the ragamuffin gospel says, we're all ragamuffins. Or like, Spurgeon said, you're just one poor sinner, passing another poor sinner a bone, or whatever it may be. But that's the idea. In learning today from a variety of sources, use what you can use and then lose what doesn't work for you. Don't pay much attention to it. Don't get involved in it. If it's not for you, let it go. You know that song from the movie Frozen? Let it go. I think that's the name of it. Shows you how much I pay attention. But Utah's famous now for having a lot of information put out there on the television news services, like new recipes or health fairs or information in the community. Well, as small as this state is, and it is a small state, there aren't that many people in it. But while it's still small, enjoy that learning, because there's a lot of people that have been living here for a long time, and they might know a little more than what you do or I do. So allow for the Spirit of God to lead you in a way that today he could show you what Utah might have for you, as he has put you here for a reason and a purpose, even if it is simply to learn from and enjoy Utah today.